week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Yes, another 7 days seems to have vanished rather quickly, so here we are again. Firstly, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show. It seemed to go down pretty well. Lots of nice comments. So big thank you to you guys for doing that. Also, another thing I kind of noticed is that the number of subscribers to the channel seems to be sort of going up quite rapidly actually each month, which is really nice. So if you're a new viewer, then great to have you along. If you've been around for a while, like I know there are a number of you, then your continued support is great. Hopefully we'll hit 2,000 subscribers at some stage, which will be really cool. I think at the moment we're 1,800 and something odd, I think. So yeah, that's going to be really cool if we do get to 2,000. That will be really nice. So today's episode of the show is brought to you by the letter E. No, not that kind of E. So what could that letter E stand for? Enjoyment? Well, if your idea of enjoyment is a bit of self-flagellation, then yes, possibly, but not in this instance. As you can see, we're looking at Dufftown. So E, I think, is going to stand for educational, because I think after we've tasted this, it will be certainly an education. Also, E stands for the category of the axis of evil, as a lot of you well know my terminology for those distilleries that produce a somewhat industrial style of spirit, which of course Dufftown is a fully paid up member, along with Deanston, Fettercairn, Glengoyne, Glenrothes and Macduff, and technically Tobermory, although Tobermory is an E+, and I'm as you well know, I did an episode of the show a while ago now on Tobermory and explained my reasoning why I think it may well end up doing a Thule and leaving the axis of evil, which would be only the second time ever. You're probably wondering about distilleries like Jura and Glenkinchie, which neither of them are particular favourites of mine, and they are just on the outskirts of the axis of evil only by their fingernails, shall we say. I mean, they are D-. I mean, so they could well end up in the axis of evil, but yeah, so, but today we're looking at Deanston, and I like doing episodes of the show about distilleries I'm not quite so keen on, because it's all about sort of the reasoning why are they or do I have not such a particularly high opinion of them, and I guess Dufftown is a bit Dufftown kind of signs up to the flip side of Goodrum's first law of whiskey, and that first law of whiskey is pretty distillery equals pretty spirit. Now, there are a few exceptions to the rule, but generally as a rule, you think of the pretty distilleries, Aberfeldy, Glengarry, Edredor, for example, pretty little distilleries, picture postcard distilleries, produce a pretty spirit. Then you have the flip side of that. You have things like Deanston, which is an ex-mill. I mean, that is certainly not a looker. That's an ugly bill. And as for Loch Lomond, I mean, God, it's a shack. It's a corrugated steel shack, for God's sake, on an industrial estate. I mean, it is not a looker. Although it's obviously not it produces an interesting whiskey, shall we say. And Deanston is like, not Deanston, Dufftown, it's like Deanston, an ex-mill. It's a little prettier than Deanston, but not by a huge amount, it has to be said. I mean, as they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but the sort of, I suppose, the owner's Diageo claim that Dufftown produces a light, elegant citric spay. That is certainly not a descriptor that I would tend to use, it has to be said. They tend to, well, we'll get to what they have a tendency to do, but you can pretty much guess what they have a tendency to do with Dufftown. Now, Dufftown, in actual fact, it has a fairly, well, moderate length fermentation. It's about 75 hours, so they're sitting in the sort of comfortably in the cereally kind of wort end of the spectrum. I mean, they claim to sort of like slowly distill it, etc., all the usual gubbins, but the spirit that comes out is not an elegant spirit whatsoever. It's probably something to do with the cut points. I think they probably take rather a large cut point to basically maximise the spirit yield. Hence you end up getting a lot of the foreshorts and the fainty notes coming into your spirit. And although there are older age statement bottlings of Dufftown, and you know, you give it long enough in the cask, as you well know, if you have a sort of like a sulphurous kind of meaty, stinky new make, and leave it for long enough, you get a robust style of spay. And in essence, to be fair, that is more the characteristic that I would say that Dufftown has. It has a more robust, somewhat sort of style, and well, it can be a bit variable. I mean, certainly the 12-year-old is probably one of the most variable bottlings that, you know, I have ever come across. I mean, although I've not tasted it for a long time, to be bluntly honest with you, I've not been in a particular hurry to taste it. So, and all of these samples are pretty old, it has to be said. They're from 2013, and I think one comes from 2015, as you can see with the different colour cap. So they're probably not totally indicative of the current releases, but you know, they'll do. They're good enough to use to explain what I think about Dufftown. So, well, pretty much nothing really much else to say, but apart from let's have a look at the lineup. Okay, so we're going to kick off with two 1 litre travel exclusive bottlings. Oh dear God! I mean, as you well know, the travel retail section of the whisky market is a bit of a conundrum, really. In essence, you have sort of distilleries that kind of use it as a dumping ground for crap, and that, having tasted numerous bottlings that have been pretty poor, I'm pretty certain in that's what they do. And then you have other distilleries that do specific bottlings for the travel retail that are horrendously expensive. You know, you just have this weird dichotomy. But let's be honest now, you know, stuff that's going to be stuck into a 1 litre bottle ain't going to be the greatest spirit on the face of the planet, is it? So anyway, we're kicking off with the Singleton of Dufftown Trinity. This, like I said, was a 1 litre travel retail bottling, bottled at 40%. So, well, we'll see what happens. The second bottling is the Unite. United in what, one wonders. Again, like I said, this is another 1 litre travel retail bottling, bottled at 40%. And the last of the no age statement bottlings was well, I don't know whether it was a special release, but it was released in 2014. There was two. This is the Tailfire. Now, as far as I'm aware, all of these bottlings are a blend of American oak or spirit aged in American oak and sherry and ex-sherry. I don't think there's no wine cask finishes or anything like that. Although I did taste an independent bottling of Dufftown. I think it was in the Canmore Strictly Limited range. It had been finished in ex-Riesling, Austrian Riesling cask, and it was bizarre, absolutely bizarre. It was one of the most bizarre whiskies I've ever tasted. You know, it was kind of like petrolly Riesling and rough Dufftown. Whoa. That was fun. It really was quite fun, and I bought some of it and I sold it, and I'm pretty certain there's a number of you that probably remember it because it was just one of those memorable whiskies. Anyway, so this is the Tailfire. God only knows what Tailfire is supposed to mean, but anyway, it was a 2014 release, and again bottled at 40%. Unlike last week's episode, which was swilling in alcohol, this week's episode is far more restrained. Then we're going to move on to the 3 age statement bottlings. This is the 12-year-old, again bottled at 40%. The next bottling is the 15-year-old, again bottled at 40%. Diageo, come on, for God's sake. And finally the 18, again bottled at 40%. You know, I mean, I've said it before that as far as I'm aware, Diageo know absolutely nothing about whiskey whatsoever. I mean, they know about business, obviously, but they know nothing about whiskey. I mean, really, you know, 40%, you know, these 2 bottlings, and they're not cheap bottlings either, you know. I mean, it's just kind of like, and I think the thing is that with Diageo is that they have obviously that many distilleries in their portfolio that they only really kind of push and actually do anything of any interest with just a handful of them. You know, the more collectible ones, the more interesting ones, the sort of, you know, the likes of Dufftown and Croysk and what have you. They're essentially just blenders fodder, and there's no real necessity to do anything interesting with them. And I suppose it's because either they can't afford to do that, or they just don't have the sort of, you know, can't focus on everything, if you see what I mean. So certain distilleries are kind of just left to get on with it, I suppose. But anyway, probably being a little bit harsh on Diageo, but then you know, they probably don't really care. One man sort of like, you know, I mean, I'm not the only one that's kind of pointed this sort of flaw in Diageo's character out, shall we say. So I can't imagine they're going to sort of like be too upset by somebody else saying it anyway. But there you go. Anyway, we're not here really to, well, we are here to talk about Diageo a bit, but anyway, we're here to taste some whiskey. So let's kick off with a bit of Trinity then. Right, okay, let's see what the nose on the Trinity gives us then, shall we? Oh dear God, that's rough. Oily, dense, and buckets of caramel. I mean, there is so much caramel here, it stinks of it, and I'm gonna put my neck out and say this caramel ain't natural caramel. I mean, you know, every now and again when this caramel business gets raised, that Diageo wheels out some kind of PR guy to sort of go, no, it has no effect whatsoever, none at all, all this kind of stuff, and you just think, what planet are you living on? Have you ever smelt your own whiskey? You know, and it is dreadful. It really is pretty poor. It's got young, sort of biscuity spirit maybe behind all of that caramel, but you know, you really couldn't tell. And look at the colour of it for a start. I mean, yeah, all right, could have been aged. It probably has been aged in a combination of American oak and cherry, and yes, that could be a natural colour. But oh, it's musty as well. It just really is not a great nose. It's just poor spirit at the end of the day. Let's see what the palate's like. Now, I hate to denigrate anybody's profession, and certainly I'm sure that the guys that work up at the distillery probably think, you know, and probably like the product and think they're doing a great job, but that really is poor. I mean, that is dreadful. I mean, it is earthy, it's musty, it's caramel flattened, it is dreadful stuff. I mean, you know, and I don't say that often, that has to be said, and I don't particularly enjoy being overly critical. Honestly, I don't. But you know, really, you know, sometimes you just have to call it as it is. At the end of the day, you know, you have to basically say a spade is a spade, or dreadful whiskey is dreadful whiskey. At the end of the day, I mean, that really is horrendous. And if you know, I wouldn't even go anywhere near that. Sort of like if I saw that on a travel retail shelf, even without having tasted it, because you just sort of go, oh my God, a 1 litre bottle of no age statement Dufftown. Anyway, we're going to move on to the next one. Right, okay, so this is the Unite. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, okay, so plus points, cleaner. It's less murky. It's quite pungent, it's young, it's got that sort of tequila-y kind of pulped fruit sort of kind of character. It's a little acetic note, so again does seem to sort of suggest maybe spirit has had a bit of a wide cut, and it's not very mature either. I mean, there certainly has that rose petal mar. There's a little bit of wet cold tea leaf possibly, and again there's ubiquitous burnt caramel notes. So again, one thinks I think they've been less heavy-handed with the caramel on this particular bottling. It's not quite so flat, and there is a little bit of sherry kind of note there, you know. But like I said, it's cleaner. It's still not setting my pants on fire, it has to be said. And I don't think that's going to happen at all throughout this entire episode. But like I said, E stands for educational. So let's see what the palate's like. Again, that's pretty rough. There's a lot of caramel going on there. It's got that flat, slightly bitterness to it. It's got a good length to it, which is quite bizarre, really, when you think about it. The spirit kind of sort of pushes past all of that kind of caramel. It's a bit like a sort of a caramel oil slick, you know. Eventually, it comes through. It's young. It's tequila-y again. Bit of spice, bit of pepper. It's excuse me. It's having its revenge there. It's got a bit of weight to it, and again, it does kind of like sort of seem to say it's sitting in the robust kind of spey style. This is certainly not light, grassy, citric, elegant whatsoever. So you know, but then again, I'm not really. The trouble is, there's too much other stuff happening to kind of detract from trying to pick out a distillery character. But you know, I think, well, maybe hopefully by the time we get to the 10, 12, etc., we'll be a bit more well versed in the distillery character. But again, not as bad as the Trinity, but still, you know, not exactly a great whiskey at the end of the day. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Tailfire. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, again, cleaner. A lot more sherry coming through on this one. I'm getting quite a nutty, almost fruitcake, sort of dried fruit sherry. Some herbs, some spice. Not getting hardly any caramel, or certainly if there is caramel used, it's been, should we say, a little bit more judicious. I'm getting a lot more sherry character, a lot less of spirit character. It's got that kind of hardness to it, which is what you'd expect, and that's pretty much about it. Don't know what it retailed for when it was released, but can't imagine it was particularly expensive. So yeah, alright, okay. The best nose so far, because there's no distillery character and it's all sherry. Oh, let's see what the bar's like. Clean, simple, straightforward, nutty, dried fruit, touch of spice, touch of pepper, all oak related, it's all sherry. Again, there's that slight sort of like, I'm getting that slight agave kind of pulp tequila-y kind of note just kind of coming through on the end. Touch of citrus, maybe some minerality as well, or something of that kind of ilk. Don't quite know what, but again, I'm not getting a huge amount of distillery character. I'm kind of picking up on pieces that I guess I've found in the previous two bottlings and kind of putting it together, I suppose. So in essence, this is probably a better bottling because it's a lot more sherry. You're not going to hear me say that one but too often, shall we say. And it's cleaner. And there's less caramel, it's less flat, it's less nasty. So I guess in that instance you've got to say, well, it's a winner. Might not be a chicken dinner though, but it's a winner. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the three age statement bottlings. So this is the 12-year-old and it's readily available nowadays, but like I said, this is a bottling from 2013, so, and like I said, it's been one of the most variable bottlings that I think I've ever come across. But let's see what we get on the nose from this actually. Okay, now it's got that industrial hard kind of character, but now the thing is, as I've always said, if you've got some balancing factors, and you know, there's some pleasant honey, it's got quite a pleasant fragrance to it. This particular one. I mean, this, I don't know what bottling code or whatever it was, because it was a World Whisky Awards sample. So you know, I couldn't tell you which bottle to go and try and find, but it's. Yeah, it's got some straw-like barley, it's got some sweet barley, some honey, a little bit of dried fruit. It's got some lovely nuttiness to it. A good balance of sweetness to hardness to sort of, you know. So yeah, okay, I can appreciate this particular bottling. Like I said, you know, it's definitely got the distillery character. It's got that hard, slightly rough kind of, well, what do they call it? Traditional character, but it's been tempered and softened by the oak. It's a slight earthiness, which, you know, it's almost a little bit of peat as well, you know. So it's quite enjoyable in a, well, sort of, yeah, sort of way. Again, it's a bit simple, but it's clean. It's a little hard. There's a little bit of that sort of pulped agave, peppery, tequila-y kind of note happening. There's a bit of spice, a bit of dried fruit, some malt, honey. Okay, it's not a beautiful whiskey. It is certainly a workman-like whiskey. You could say it's a kind of like a bit of blend fodder, I suppose, but you know, it's not dreadful, unlike the travel retail bottlings. And you know what, I'd drink that if there was nothing else left in the cupboard. But no, it's not too bad, shall we say, at the end of the day for a Dufftown. So that, I think, is praise. Okay, so let's move on to the 15. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Obviously, you can get the maturity. It smells a lot more mature than the 12-year-old. It's got a pleasant sort of herbal honey character. Again, it's a bit industrial. There's a slight sort of there's a slight kind of oily, petrol-y kind of kerosene-y kind of note just in the background. It's okay, it's pleasant. There's a fair amount of oak. There's some sweet vanilla, but again, it's kind of, yeah, it's all right. It's okay. See what the pal's like. Oh, someone's been a bit heavy-handed with the caramel on this one. Oh, that's bitter. It's got some pleasant toffee notes, but the caramel is a bit too OTT. I mean, it's possible it could be oak, but I'm getting the impression that it's probably not. Certainly, you know, if this was another non-Diageo distillery, you'd probably say, yeah, okay, that probably is just sort of like a little bit overuse of oak. But knowing it's Diageo and knowing Diageo loves their E150, it ain't. I'm pretty certain it's not natural. It's that bitterness, and It's, yeah, the nose was really nice. The nose was, well, I say nice. The nose was pleasant. I mean, you know, it had some maturity. It had some lovely mature oak notes. It had some character, well, sort of. And then the palate comes along, and it's just, oh dear God, this is such a disappointment. It really is. After that, you know, relatively pleasant nose, and you taste it, and you think, well, that's not kind of like what the nose was suggesting this was going to be like. And well, how many whiskies have you tasted when that is indeed one? So let's move on to the final sample of the day. This is the 18. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Straight off the bat, more Oloroso, more herbal Oloroso, a lot more sherry. Almost kind of perfumed sort of orange and clementine, citrus kind of notes. It's got a touch of fragrant spice. Again, more sherry than anything else. I'm not getting a huge amount of spirit character. It's got that sort of hardness, you know, which is kind of implied, if you like. Yeah, I mean, so it's a lot of sherry there. It's kind of covering up the distillery character, and it's got a pleasant maturity. Again, it's not exactly a pretty nose. It's a workmanlike. It's, you know, an industrial. It's a hard nose. It's a hard nose to. It's a hard nose to love, as they say. Did somebody make that song? Don't know. Anyway, let's sort of pass on. Well, the first thing you notice, it's really underpowered. I mean, 40%, it is just, you know, it's really should have been at 46%, to give it some intensity. You know, it's just a bit, it's quite nutty, it's heavily sherried, there's some dried fruit. Again, it's got some pleasant maturity, there's some coffee, some toffee. Again, I don't get a huge amount of caramel, unnatural caramel, but then given the amount of sherry that they're using in this, there's no real need for it. It's, you know, it just doesn't really feel like it's all kind of connected. I mean, that sounds a bit weird, but, you know, the oak is sort of there, you know, the spirit is, well, somewhere, and it just kind of feels like it's like a bit of a stroppy teenager. It's like, I don't really care. You know, it's like, no, I don't want to do that. You know, it feels like that. It just doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. It's kind of just there, you know. And I reckon that could easily be fixed by bottling at that 46%, lifting the alcohol content, lifting the intensity, maybe bringing out some spiciness. Because if that's where you're going, you know, lots of sherry, no character, distillery character, then just give me something, you know, just give me something other than sort of blandness, I suppose, at the end of the day. And that's what it is at the end of the day. It's just kind of like boring. It's there. It's whiskey. It tastes like whiskey, but it's just, you know, I'd probably more happily have a Macallan than that, you know, at the end of the day. And it's just a real shame, because, well, maybe they can, well, it's making a sort of like, what's the terminology, making a silk purse out of a sow's ear, ain't gonna happen, I don't think. So yeah, probably the best thing Diageo can do is just leave it alone and just chuck it into some dreadful blends. There you go. Right, okay, so you probably think I've been pretty hard on poor old Dufftown, and yes, I probably have, but it's, you know, at the end of the day, you know, when I want to sort of taste whiskey, when I want to sell a whiskey and drink it, I want to enjoy it. I want it to be a lovely experience, and I want the customer to enjoy the same kind of experience that I'm kind of getting. And I'm afraid that Dufftown just really does not do that for me. It does not give me a pleasant experience. It's like I said, it's educational, and I don't really want to have an educational bottle on the shelf because shelf space is at a premium, and I'd rather have sort of enjoyment on the shelf rather than education. I mean, if the two kind of work together, then even better, But the thing is, it's okay. There are going to be people that enjoy this kind of style of whiskey. There are people that enjoy sprouts, for God's sake, and there are people that sort of love cabbage. It's like, duh, no, God, now how can you like sprouts? They're horrendous. And so this is kind of like the sprouts of the whiskey world. It's anyway. So let's just run through them. So the Trinity, probably one of the worst bottles I have ever. Well, no, it probably is one of the worst bottles I've ever tasted. It's horrendous. It was dreadful. It was rubbishy spirit that was sort of like flattened with vast amounts of E150, and Diageo basically thought they would shaft you with this crap, basically. I'm sorry to be that kind of blunt about it, but that's pretty much what it was. The Unite was slightly better. It was still pretty young spirit, but at least there was a little bit more character there rather than sort of ubiquitous sort of vast amounts of bloody E150. And the Tailfire, again, not exactly sort of the sort of whiskey that has me in eulogising in sort of like orgasmic raptures, but it was better than the previous two, so it had to have something going for it. The 12 was, like I said, probably one of the most variable bottlings I've ever come across, and this just happened to be one of the slightly better bottlings. I have tasted the 12, which has been pretty much somewhere akin to the sort of like the Trinity, rough and dreadful, but that was actually not a bad bottling at all, as bottlings of Dufftown go. The 15, again, kind of another one of those whiskies that has plus points and its minus points. The plus points being the nose was quite pleasant and interesting, and the palate couldn't kind of cash those checks. It was dreadful. At the end of the day, it really was a tale of two halves. And the 18-year-old, which again was not bad, but again a disappointment. You could have, it's pretty much like my old school reports that pretty much always said could do better, and that, I think, is, if I was writing a school report for, was exactly what I would say, could do better. And certainly the fix is pretty simple. It's just basically not diluting the spirit so much. It's just kind of bottle at 46%, and at least you would have something that would have at least a little bit more interest. But like I said, Diageo has probably got no interest in doing that sort of thing with this distillery, because, like I said, pretty much most of it is going to go for the blends, and like a lot of distilleries. But there you go. So I hope this has been a kind of like a fair appraisal of the distillery. That, like I said, it has its plus points and it has its minus points, but it is what it is at the end of the day. It is a fully paid up member of the Axis of Evil, because some of the bottlings are just indefensible at the end of the day, really. Okay, if you're going, every distillery has casks that maybe don't sort of work out exactly as they like. Maybe a batch, it's just an off batch. It's just get rid of it, shove it into a cheap blend, sell it to the Far East or whatever. Just don't bloody bottle it as a there's still a lot of crap whiskey on the market, which is a real shame in my personal opinion, but there you go. Anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. Now, next week's episode of the show will be one of the episodes that I had planned for episode 400. So I think that's going to be interesting. But no, I mean, honestly, I think today's episode of the show was really interesting. Educational. That's the word. Good dramming and good afternoon.